All right, boys and girls, today we are going to be going over a wetlands review. We will be taking a test probably on Monday when you come back over the weekend. Okay, so the wetlands review. One of the first things we need to talk about is the ecosystem. Now, an ecosystem is an animal's environment. Okay, these are just some terms, some vocabulary terms that we're going to go over. Wetlands is a place where the water meets the land, and some examples of these wetlands are ponds, marshes, swamps, and bogs. Landforms are just different formations of land, which include mountains, hills, valleys, and plains. Conservation is when we save our natural resources, for example, water conservation and soil conservation. With the wetlands, we're going to do a lot of water conservation. That's what we've been talking about. The term common good is when we help our community and our parks. Now, how do people change the ecosystem? What are some of the positive and negative impacts that we have, that people do in order to change the ecosystem? Some of the positive effects, for example, we can pick up trash. We can replant any trees that have been broken down. We can clean up the environment. The negative impacts, things that are bad, is people litter all the time. We build houses on wetlands. We destroy a lot of the natural habitat of these animals by building houses and stores, restaurants, stuff like that. We pollute. We have oil spills. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is inherited traits. Inherited trait is something that you are born with. For example, hair color, eye color. In a beaver, that includes its tail, its teeth, its fur. In a plant, that includes the plant's flowers, the color of the flowers, the stem, the shape. All those are inherited traits, things that can't change, things that it doesn't learn. The next thing we're going to talk about is learned behaviors. Things that you have to learn as you grow older. For example, walking, talking, riding a bike, eating. When we're talking about animals like beavers, some learned behaviors of a beaver is having to maybe go and build a dam. Okay, building a dam is actually something that is inherited. Okay, now these are some of those things, like maybe learning how to dive is something that the beaver has to learn. Learning which foods are right to eat. Okay, a food web. Now the food web always starts with the sun. The sun, then we have our producers, then we have our consumers. Of course, our producer is grass because it uses the sun's energy to live, to get its energy. So here are a couple of examples of a food web. We have the sun, the grass, the insect, energy flowing to the insects, then energy flowing from the insect to the fish, and then energy from the fish to the birds. And we have the same one on the bottom, sun to grass, insects eating the grass for energy, energy flowing to the frogs when it eats the insects, and energy flowing to the snake from the frog once it is eaten. Those are just a few quick examples of some food webs. Now, what would happen if one of these was to be taken out of the food web? For example, what if the frogs weren't there? Now we would have an abundance, a large amount of insects. The snakes would probably die out because they would not have enough food in that environment. Okay, now here are some plant functions. You need to know this for the test. What are some of these things in a plant? We have the roots, the leaves, the flowers, the stems. The roots are down here. The stems, you have your flowers, or your leaves, I mean. Then you have your flowers up here on top. Now, the functions of the roots, the root is to absorb water. The leaves take in the sunlight. The flowers produce pollen. The stem helps keep the flower upright, helps it keep it stable. Okay, the next thing is life cycles. Now we have the life cycle of a frog here, but we could also be talking about the life cycle of a plant or a flower. A frog starts with the eggs. That's the first part of the life cycle. Then we have the tadpole. From the tadpole, we have a froglet. Once it starts becoming a frog, and of course we then have our frog as the last stage of that. Now, if we were supposed to be talking about maybe a plant, of course we would start out with the seed. Okay. After the seed, we would have a bud or a sprout, which would be, just coming out of the plant barely. So this would be a little sprout or bud. We then have a young plant that comes out with about to flower. Maybe it's still budding a little bit. Okay, and then we have, of course, our adult plant with all the flowers that are attached to it. Okay, and this would be our flower, which and then again it will pollinate and create more seeds. Our next stage the next thing we're going to be talking about is a beaver's inherited traits, things that it is born knowing already. Of course, it's born with its sharp teeth. It knows that once it's born, it's going to build a dam. Cutting down trees is also something that it is born knowing to do. Now, droughts and floods, these two things are forces of nature that definitely impact our ecosystem. Okay, the droughts is a period of time when there is no rain. A flood is also a period of time where there is a whole bunch of rain, too much rain, too much in fact that the soil can no longer absorb all the water, which and then of course causes it to flood. Now, just to let you know that when we're talking about the wetlands is also a natural sponge. It soaks up a lot of the water, but yes, over time, if it's raining too much, it will not be able to absorb all that water. Now, a few of the organizations that help Mitchell Lake, the first one is, or one of them is the Audubon Society. It helps conserve and preserve our natural habitat, and it helps the birds in that area. We have the San Antonio Water System, or SAWS, that helps Mitchell Lake, and the Texas Parks and Wildlife is also one of those that helps assist the Mitchell Lake area. Okay, now let's see some things that we can do to help Mitchell Lake, to help conserve the wetlands. We of course can build houses on stilts, build bridges so that we do not walk on the actual floor, the dirt of the wetlands. We have brochures, we have pamphlets that we can send out for people to understand or to get information about conserving the wetlands. Now, the only time that it would ever be acceptable to disturb the wetland would be if it was for the common good. If it was to help the animals in some way, then of course that would probably be the only time that it would be okay to disturb the wetlands. Now, we have all these different organizations. The Audubon Society is again one that helps conserve and preserve our ecosystem. It helps with the birds in that area. The San Antonio Water System helps with water conservation. The Texas Parks and Wildlife also helps our state parks, and it's actually funded by Texas. The Texas government actually helps pay for that stuff. So here is the review. Go over it. If you need to hear it a few times, and go ahead and do that. Look over the weekend, and we will probably be testing on Monday. That's when I have it scheduled. So be ready to take the test on Monday. All right? Okay. All right. Have a great weekend.